Hey, Made in America listeners. Whether this is your first show or you've been with us for 5 years, thank you so much for joining us. Please spread the word about what we're doing and the great things that are happening in manufacturing with somebody you know.
Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. I am really excited to have Monique Iken on today from PMC-STS. Monique, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's the Made in America podcast, Monique. So we always start off with the same two questions. What do you make and why do you make it?
Yes, so PMC-STS makes very precise, highly engineered pressure and temperature sensors. And we make it because there's so many processes out there that require this kind of precision across a lot of industries. We're in a lot of verticals, and this niche product, highly engineered, very precise, is something that a lot of our customers really need.
Yeah, and talk about U.S. and Connecticut, high precision, high quality, highly engineered, ticking all the boxes. So I know we've got a lot to talk about, and probably, as we said before, maybe not too much for one podcast, but we'll see what we can get done.
Sure.
Because I definitely, you've got a really interesting background, going through multinationals, being overseas, seeing kind of the move from U.S. to outsource and then back to onshoring. So a lot to cover there. I think, PMC and the STS kind of integration, purchase, and all of that. And then kind of engagement with the ecosystem and kind of you really kind of embracing the broader manufacturing ecosystem. There's just a lot to cover. So let's get started.
Sure.
And I think where we'll go is, let's just sort of start with your background. Maybe help the audience know kind of your journey in manufacturing.
Sure. So I actually started out as a mechanical engineer. I was a product design engineer for several years. And what happened was the industry that I was in was starting to decline in the U.S., but seeing growth overseas.
What industry was that?
This was in the power industry. This was in the 90s. And my management said, look, Monique, you've spent the last couple of years figuring out how to design these, how to manufacture these here in the U.S. We need to stay competitive and find other places to manufacture our products overseas where our new customer base is located.
This is power turbines, for power generation
This is
plants?
steam generation. So the giant steam, the kettles, if you will, that feed the turbines and the generators.
Got it.
So they said, we need you to go overseas and find places that can make this just as good as we can. And they put me on a plane and put me on a lot of planes. And so I was, traveling all around the world, and it was fantastic, just finding suppliers and actually helping to build a few factories. So I sort of fell into supply chain from an engineering perspective. And then I just continued, and I found myself working at GE. I was there for over 20 years, and I was doing a lot of sourcing with them, quality, sourcing process, supply chain, supplier quality, so a lot of different roles.
So what was it like? So who were you working for when you first started going overseas?
So that was ABB Combustion Engineering, here in Connecticut.
Windsor,
yeah. So that was in the 90s.
And so where were you going initially? I mean, people probably, it's hard for even me to remember, but 30 years ago it was a different world. What was that like, kind of traveling? Yeah,
I recall going to Eastern Europe, a couple different countries over there, and also into Asia primarily. So looking into China and
so when you're over there, I mean, where were, from a development perspective, fairly underdeveloped, unsophisticated, or were you surprised to find, it was easy to find suppliers? Kind of tell us what it was like back then trying to...
Yeah, so I was able to find suppliers, I think, that had the technical capabilities. What was such a revelation was watching people welding with no, protection, right, and in flip-flops and things like that. And so it was like, wow, okay. You sort of start getting a sense for why they are low cost, right? And it was really rewarding, though, to sort of help them raise their game in that regard. Because if you're going to do work for us, you're going to do it to our standards, and that means safety and quality and everything.
So were you bringing sort of education on quality systems and, hey, if you're going to be welding, here's what eye protection looks like? You can't be barefoot
right.
You're a TIG welder or whatever?
Yep. And when it's raining, there's going to be moisture in the welds, and, maybe that's not the best time of day, during the rainy season, when it's raining in the afternoon, just that kind of awareness. Yeah. So it was helping them up their game. And I think that was, honestly, one of the benefits of outsourcing, if you will, was, to help a lot of these companies and countries come along.
So it seems like your engineering background was probably super helpful, because I think a lot of people think about, moving production and it's just all about, oh, they're going to do it for like 70% less, just give them the deal. But, it seems like you actually had to use your actually manufacturing know-how and engineering background to be able to guarantee the product would work.
Absolutely. And I mean, it even got more basic than that, just translating drawings and things so they would actually know what they were saying, right? So, it's really interesting when it was their first adventure into, bringing the product overseas. So yeah, it was a bit of a learning curve I think on both sides.
On both sides. And was it instantly successful, or did you find that there was like kind of fits and starts, like sort of started going and then had some setbacks and then had to sort of figure it out, or how did that play out?
We were pretty methodical in how we were doing things. And, usually it starts out small and then it grows. I think it went, pretty well. And yeah, there's obviously those little hiccups along the way that you have to deal with, like with any operation. But we were able to, produce product overseas and then, build the units overseas. And, it all went pretty well.
And did you find, like, when it first started, sounds like one of the things you said early on, which I don't want to gloss over, was, and I think this actually ends up tying back to kind of when in the future we'll get back to sort of reshoring, but like the idea that you actually were trying to move manufacturing and construction to where the customer was. So
yes.
It wasn't like, what you were doing wasn't sort of creating these like power things to ship from, Eastern Europe back to the US, but it was to build and then install and sell and support in Eastern Europe.
That's right. It was so important. It was definitely a competitive advantage. If we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have had the jobs, because it would have just been too expensive to build it in the US and then ship it overseas. I mean, this is large industrial equipment, very heavy, very expensive to ship. So
right.
yeah.
They're not going in the luggage hold of a passenger aircraft.
Nope.
And so how did you end up transitioning from ABB to GE then?
I was approached about this great new thing called Six Sigma quality, and I just got sucked in. I had a couple friends that were saying, you got to check this out. This is really neat. And sort of this whole concept of continuous improvement, which I've really grown quite a passion for. So that was really what drew me in. That was my first role at GE. And then the idea was, we're going to train you on all of this quality concepts and tools, and then you're going to bring it into all the businesses that you work in. And we're just going to do as best a job as we can, right?
It's almost like an internal consulting group?
Yeah, it was. Kind of. Yeah, exactly.
And then were you back overseas again?
I mean, GE is a very global company. So in all of the roles that I had, I was traveling overseas. It's really interesting because at GE, you have one little sliver of the total process, but you own that over 165 countries overseas, right? So it's
no, say more.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because for me, that I was still so early in my career, I didn't have an appreciation for that. It wasn't until I started working for smaller companies after the fact that I'm like, wow, some of these roles are like much broader, that was intriguing to me, and that's really what helped me with that transition from the largest company on the planet at the time, right, and then into some of these smaller.
So like when you say you were at GE and you own like one sliver of the process, can you just like help me like paint that picture? What does that mean?
Well, you own so there was one role where I owned the spare parts for the power industry, or I owned at one point the P&E budget, and the P&E budget was a $1.2 billion budget that P&E plant and equipment.
Oh,
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So like I had a P&E role in it. I owned a budget that was $1.2 billion, and it was like, but the numbers didn't faze you because it was a big company, right?
Right.
And it's funny because a lot of the companies I've worked for since aren't even that big, right? But that was just my budget. It was the P&E budget. It was just one part of the operation, but I owned it for, all the energy companies across the entire planet. And it's a big spend, all of the thousands of locations, right?
Right.
So it's a big number, but it's just one little thing, right? It's one little line item on the
like a much broader balance sheet.
Budget, yeah.
Interesting. And so if you're owning one item across the globe, are you going to these plants to see what they need? Like, how are you thinking about managing that?
In some cases, yes. But in a lot of cases, no. I think we got so used to just doing things remote. And we would talk about
that remote, even pre-pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, people would say, Monique, you can't be everywhere all at once, so you have to be in one location. And that was good enough because, yeah, you had to be remote for most of what you did. Most of my roles were global, and it was, the Americas, EMEA, and Asia, right?
Right.
So, and I had people in all those locations, and you really had to learn how to manage, through your team for sure.
Talk about that a little bit, like thinking about what kind of management skills you developed by having to lead that way.
So a lot of what we learned at the General Electric company, because they do a lot of leadership training, was, how do you have influencing skills, right? You can't just say, okay, I would like you to do this and just hope or assume that it's going to get done. You really have to, be tenacious. And I mentioned I have a degree in international business, and you have to really get an appreciation for all the different cultures, because in some cultures, saying yes doesn't mean yes. Yes is like, oh, I heard what you said. I don't agree with it, but I did hear what you said. Yes.
Really?
Thank you. Yes. So you have to really learn, and sometimes the hard way, all the nuances, right? And I think that people that do work for a global company like GE, overseas, they're understanding that they're working for Americans, and they get an appreciation for how Americans do business, which can be different from how, they tend to do business in their home country. But we also have to be very intentional with how we manage all those different cultures, because there are different drivers. Just think about how do you manage your team, and what drives them, what motivates them. It's going to look very different. And I actually grew up with two parents from other countries, so I felt like I had an appreciation. And actually, a lot of my roles at GE were that, like, okay, Monique, we have all these acquisitions, and they're all over the world, and everybody's doing things very different ways. We need you to come in, figure out what's the best practice, and then make everybody do it the same way. And it's like, okay, and use all those influencing skills and all that knowledge about international business and foreign cultures, and make it all work. Okay. So, that's my job. All right.
And so when you think about like what your core job was, even when you were running like the plant equipment budget or anything, it was really more about influencing people, and how do you get people to drive to the outcomes you want.
Absolutely. So we were very metric driven, as you can imagine. So, yeah.
And so, like, I'm just thinking you have an engineering degree, an engineering background, really kind of like hands-on. I mean, you talked about even in specifics like days at ABB, you're overseas somewhere, maybe in Southeast Asia or whatever, reminding them that you can't weld in the afternoon in the rainy season because moist welds don't hold when you need them to hold later on.
Yeah, a little bit of porosity, and it's not a good outcome.
Not good,
no.
Yeah, terrible outcomes, which you don't find out till the thing falls apart, 10 years later.
Right.
To now, you're as far as you can get from the welder and still being responsible for the same level of quality outcome.
Absolutely.
Stressful?
No, I don't think it was, because I really didn't know any better. So I had only been a design engineer for a few years, and then I joined GE, and it was just, I was with them for over 20 years. So it was just how we had to do business, how business got done.
And so, like, when you think back on what they taught you and what you learned, like, what are some of the things you carry away as from management lessons that you either think other people would learn from, or that you still use today to, like, kind of deliver those kind of results?
Yeah, I am a firm believer in never giving up, right? And being persistent and being tenacious, and just continuing to push it and drive it, right? I think that the only way that you're going to not succeed is if you give up trying. So I really, and I carry that with me, even in my personal life, right? Whether you're trying to like get healthy or whatever, it's like, you got to keep going, because if you give up, then you definitely won't succeed, right?
No doubt.
So that's a big mantra that I carry with me.
Yeah, it's funny. I was watching a little clip of Kobe Bryant, the basketball player, obviously since passed away, but he was just talking about, like, whether you win or lose, like the way he thinks about it is like, it's not about winning or losing, it's about keep trying. Because he's like, if you go out today and you give your all and you win, when you wake up in the morning, you got to start all over again.
That's
if you give your all and you lose the game, when you wake up in the morning, you got to start all over again. So it's really all about, like, kind of reapproaching with 100%.
That's right.
Yeah, I get that.
Get back in the ring.
Get back in the ring. So, but I guess one of the things you talked about, which I'm trying to like drive into, is you talked about being super metrics driven, and I think that people often see a view of saying, "Hey, you're either people focused or you're numbers focused." Numbers could be dollars, it could be KPIs, and you've talked about getting the numbers through people,
right?
And I just wonder if you could like bring those things together, and how you thought about. Being tenacious is one thing, but if you keep telling people to do something they don't do, you could tell them 1,000,000 times, they're still not going to do it.
That's right. And again, when you have the international piece that's at play, you really have to get to know people on a personal level. So yes, driving for the metrics, but you really, it was probably, if it was just an all-American team, it might have been different, but having an international, like global team, you really had to get to know everybody on a very personal level and really understood what drove them. And with some cultures, it can be very different. And personalize the approach. And I still, even with my company that I'm in now with 40 people, I want to understand, what drives them, what makes them happy, what they want out of their job, right? And try to make that happen for them so that they can stay motivated and that they want to work to the common goal, because there's always the carrot and the stick. I'm not so much of a stick person, although I can be if I need to be, but I prefer the carrot.
100%. You got to have a little bit of both, but it's better if you can go more carrot. There's got to be accountability.
Yeah.
So let's pivot to you sort of touched on a little bit about PMC-STS. So talk about kind of your transition out of global. I mean, listen, I haven't been there, but you've got this jet set lifestyle. You're managing $1 billion plus budgets. You've got people all over the world, right? I mean, that's got to be kind of some kind of thing. And then now you're in a very different place. How did you make that transition and why?
Yeah, so like most former GE employees, I found myself working for a business that had been spun off. And as GE was going through their process of right sizing, there were a lot of businesses that got spun off. And even though I was working for the same people with the same people, the company was a little bit different, right? And I had to rethink a little bit. Well, now what do I want to be when I grow up, right? And I became more interested and intrigued by some of these smaller companies. It wasn't that I wanted to go all the way to the other side. I was working for a large, public corporation, but I was intrigued by some of these smaller companies where the roles were a little bit broader, and I could learn more things that I really didn't have in my operations roles. I was learning about finance and sales and marketing and just broadening my own skills. And that was really intriguing. And then I also found it very rewarding because a lot of these smaller companies, they want to land the big fish, right? And the fact that GE was the big fish, and just giving some insights like, no, that's not really what they want. You think that that's what they want to hear, but let me tell you what they're really thinking. And I could bring some nice insights. And it was really nice to, help the companies to succeed, with some of these bigger customers. So
were you doing consulting or when you were?
No, I had a after I was spun off, I just I was interested in approaching looking into some of these other roles, and I took them, and it just kind of led to other things, and it led to broader roles in smaller companies. So as I was going through the learnings, and I wound up at what is considered a small company, less than 50 employees, a manufacturer here in Connecticut. And I think also during that time, COVID was happening, right?
Right.
And this concept of reshoring was really gaining more popularity as people's supply chains were disrupted. And, some people just started thinking, gee, I can spend a little bit more money, but I can have it made here. And I don't have to deal with any of that. So I really think it's become a very popular, trend, and I'm happy to ride that wave. Really,
ride that wave. Well, so I think you bring an interesting perspective because you rode the wave to outsourcing,
right?
And now seeing it from the other side. And I guess from that perspective, something I like to ask people that are kind of involved, and you're maybe the first person I spoke to who kind of has seen it from both ends. So it'd be interesting to get your perspective. Do you think that this sort of trend has legs? And I'll frame it up this way. I always view that people have huge recency bias. Mm-hmm. So, when all the ships are lined up for months outside of the port of Long Beach or whatever, mm-hmm. That there's a burning desire to kind of reshore it and bring things in. But the further we get away from that, and as things have to some extent smoothed out on that regard, do you think that the incentives and the pressures to reshore still exist?
I think that, the risk is still there, and it always really comes down to, business decisions. So when we were outsourcing in the 90s, that was the competitive advantage then. That was something new. And now it's a different environment, and I think it's a different competitive advantage to have your products right here. So I think it's all about mitigating risk. And you got to remember that manufacturing is pretty sticky, right? It's not easy to set up a new shop somewhere. So I think for the people that are making those decisions and saying, that's it, I'm done, I want my stuff made here, that's going to stay for a while, because you can't make that decision quickly, easily. It takes a lot of commitment, resources, funding, equipment moves. So yeah, I think there is going to be some stickiness to that.
So tell me from your view, let's just talk about PMC for a second.
Yeah.
So I know it's a relatively new role to you,
Yes.
but PMC is a new company. So
Right.
why don't we just give the audience a background on PMC, and then why we call it PMC-STS?
Yeah.
And then we'll kind of connect the dots to onshoring. So go ahead.
Sure. So PMC has been located in Danbury, Connecticut for over 60 years. We had 2 owners, one for the first 40 years, one for the last 20. And the last owner, when he was ready to retire, he offered to sell to STS. We had been business partners for a long time at that point. Originally, STS was a supplier of ours. They provided us with some very accurate and precise sensing elements that go into our sensors. And then because we were focused primarily on a North American market and they had a presence everywhere but North America, it became very synergistic, where we became a distribution arm for them. And so it was a really good partnership, very similar companies. They're not even that much bigger than us, but just a really good relationship. And the acquisition process has been very comfortable, because we knew them and because they had every intention for keeping us, completely intact. So it's been pretty smooth.
Pretty since they got there. And so how did they find you, and why were you interested in kind of running the shop?
Yeah, so we met at a trade show. The 2 companies met at a trade show and said, hey, you have something we need and you have something we can help you with. And it was, as PMC has been trying to grow and expanding their product offerings and so on, we have, different partners that we've worked with along the way to bring us along that journey. And STS was one of them. And they've been very supportive and just great to work with. And they are going to enable our growth. They are digitizing a lot of our processes. We're going to be upgrading our ERP system. We're going live with a new CRM next week. And so a lot of exciting things happening. And like most small companies, we want to grow. I was reading the recent CBIA report, and there's 4,000 plus manufacturing companies in the state of Connecticut, and over 3,000 of those are small, less than 50 employees. So we're in good company. We're certainly not alone, but like most small companies, we want to become a bigger company. So
yes, that's the goal.
They're going to help us with that.
So, but how did PMC find you?
How did they find me? It was just, they were looking to, after the acquisition, which was only 2 years ago, they were originally running it themselves, and then they said, you know what, we want somebody here full time. We want a full time president, and they found me.
They found you, and you were ready for it.
I was, like I said, I was on this journey of, broader and broader roles, and this is the broadest one I've had. This is the first time I've had a president role. It was before I was more, chief operating officer type of roles, really focusing on operations. So this has been a great opportunity for me, for sure.
So you're broadening your horizons to revenue generation, sales, and marketing from more of an operational role? Yeah.
Well, part of the competitive advantage, right, especially when you don't have, strong tools or maybe, a lot of structure, I'm bringing some of that black belt, Six Sigma, view of things, and building capacity, building bandwidth so that we can grow within the resources that we have now. But yeah, that's the advantage I think that I bring, having a very strong operational background. And I also know, something about sales and marketing and finance as well. So
exactly, bring that to bear.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about what you guys do. Can we just elaborate on that a little bit more? Because I think like many manufacturers, you make something that goes into other stuff.
Exactly.
And I think most people try and connect manufacturing to something that they use, which probably most people don't use what you guys make in their day-to-day personal lives or directly.
Well, we support a lot of industries, and it is mostly industrial applications. So whether it's, food and beverage, processes, where you have to supply gas, in certain amounts to execute the manufacturing process, where it has to be very specific. We are involved with water and wastewater. So, those are more of the level sensors and pressure sensors. We're in motorsports. We are on Indy cars and in some of the test facilities for motors, not just for automotive, but, aircraft engines and diesel engines for locomotives and things like that. So, those are, oil and gas, there's so much power. We're doing fusion energy. We're doing, batteries for electrical vehicles. We're in so many different things because there are so many needs for very accurate pressure and temperature readings, right?
Right.
A lot of processes. So yeah, we're in a lot of industries.
And so is there, when you think about like what you guys do every day, is that level of like precision interesting to you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Because as an engineer, I geek out over this every day. I love it. It's so interesting, so fascinating. What we are doing is so high level. It's niche, but we're really helping some people out that cannot find off the shelf options for what they need, and that's fascinating. That creative design process. I get as involved with the engineering and understanding that as I do with now how are we going to build it and how do we sell more of this, and so it's just a great challenge.
Yeah, as I could just tell there's something you're really excited about. And I think as a leader of a company, it's really, really helpful when you like love the thing that you make or the thing that you do, and you can bring that energy. I think it's very infectious and critical from
absolutely right.
Leadership. So when you think about sort of PMC, STS is a Swiss company.
Yes.
So you're kind of back to global company in that regard.
A little bit, and they like that.
I bet they do.
Yeah.
How do you think about the position of PMC when you take a step back and think about sort of global supply chain and onshoring or reshoring? Like, is there an impact of that from a PMC perspective?
So yeah, as far as the role, yes, PMC is now a much more global company because of the affiliation with STS. And they were definitely looking for that in the president role, somebody that had that experience and could take them global and really understand that. So that piece of it, yes, that was very interesting. But then you combine that with a company that was primarily serving a North American market, which is now growing with this reshoring. So I still feel very much so that this is an American company. All of our employees are 40 employees from the state of Connecticut. We still are selling primarily to a U.S. and North American market. But now with our synergies, we had been selling the STS products here in the States, but now we have opportunities to sell some of our products because it isn't 100% overlap. We have different product lines. How can we now sell that overseas? So that's like a big change for them. They hadn't really done much of that. And now with STS backing us up, a lot of opportunity. And again, a little bit more learning curve, different certifications that you need, with some of the electrical components and things like that. But we're excited to go on that journey for sure.
Well, like you said, small companies love to dream of becoming bigger companies.
Yes.
So every time there's an opportunity, that's really exciting.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to touch on like a couple of things, just in terms of your career journey. You mentioned CBIA. I know you have a bit of a passion for thinking about like kind of building the next generation of manufacturers. And so I'd love for you to sort of share that with the audience, because certainly one of our goals is to help create excitement around manufacturing.
Absolutely. Yes. I recently became a manufacturing ambassador for the state of Connecticut. And I told Paul Lavoie, I said, I was already,
unofficially doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think it's funny as you get further on in your career, early on, you're figuring out, how do I make it and what skills do I need, to achieve. But then I think as you get further along, you start looking back a little bit and you realize, how much like you're so heads down, you don't realize it. And I've really started getting more involved with mentoring, not only for companies, but, for people and employees, and really, really enjoying that process. And it's very rewarding. And I think, I think manufacturing is a great career, obviously. And I would love to see that grow in the state of Connecticut. So, any chance I get to talk about it, I will do that.
You're doing it. So in addition to being a part of the ambassador program about manufacturing that Paul runs, are you doing any other like mentoring or teaching or getting out there to kind of share the passion?
Yeah. And even before this role, there were a few opportunities that I had to completely grow an organization from scratch. And, sometimes if you can't afford to buy the talent that you want, you have to build it, right? So I would look for those people that, were really motivated, wanted to do something different, wanted to learn something, and, just grow them and show them the way. And, very rewarding. People saying, you gave me a career, you gave me skills that I didn't know I had, in me to do. And so, yeah, that's been really rewarding. And doing the Girls in Engineering, Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day, Danbury High School, it's just any opportunity I have to try to motivate people, because people always say they want to see people like me doing it. So I want to show, particularly like women in engineering, women in manufacturing, it's still kind of rare. So I want to show anybody I can, that you can do this too.
How has women in manufacturing changed in your career? I bet it's come a long way, or is that just my perception?
I think the focus has come a long way, where you're really trying to encourage it. But honestly, the last time I looked at the metrics, I don't know that the numbers have really moved that much.
Really?
But we're trying.
Well, listen, there's a very metrics-oriented approach, which I appreciate. Because, feelings are one thing, but the numbers are the reality.
Right.
But so let me ask you this. Do you think that I think this is the right way to frame it up, but do you think the acceptance of women in manufacturing has changed? Like
Absolutely.
Do you feel more, welcome feels like maybe the wrong word. I don't know if there's a better word, but do you feel more welcome, I guess?
Well, I see more people like me, right? There's more women for sure in manufacturing. And I definitely think it's completely accepted now. But, it's hard to convince people to do something that isn't their passion, So it's like you still have to have that passion to want to do it. But yes, I think now, there are more opportunities and people are more open to that and accepting. I'm not always the only girl in the room when
that's what I was wondering.
That
helps a lot, right? Like I think it helps to see.
It's super fun.
It helps to see other people.
I go to events and I get to talk to other women there.
Sure.
It's fun.
So when you think about sort of growing manufacturing careers and jobs, it feels like in some senses there's like, I don't know. I don't know that I would say, I'm trying to think how I want to frame this up, but well, I'll ask it this way. What would you do if I made you, gave you a magic wand and said, like, you can do these three things, and if these three things happened, it would really encourage growth of manufacturing careers in the United States. You could say New England, Connecticut, whatever you think you have a view of. What do you think we need to change to encourage more of that growth?
So going back to the comment I just made about inspiring people to want to do this, I think it's so important to get into the schools early, right? And show them like how cool it is to make machines. My father was an engineer, so he was bringing me to work long before there was a bring your daughter to work day. And I got to see all these cool machines and I was inspired. And I think it's so important to continue to do that. We're doing that, at the high school level, at the college level, trying to encourage people to go into these careers. That's important. The thing about manufacturing is, like most things, you have to put the work in, right? And I think it's so important to get those hands-on experiences. Like you can't just come in and manage manufacturing. I think you really have to have that hands-on experience early on. So creating those opportunities, is important as well. I'm really encouraged by like the ACM and what they're doing. Like their expo that they're having. It's part recruiting, right, and then part okay, now let's talk business to business, and that's the type of stuff that I think we need to continue to do. So it's the the networking and certainly the RSPs are working on this as well, like getting the networking going within the companies that might otherwise be competition to solve some of these workforce problems. So I think that's it, working with the kids, at all levels to inspire them, also, working business to business and, just creating those early opportunities. It's so important to get your hands dirty and really understand what manufacturing is, I think, to be able to lead in the future.
Yeah, see yourself do it. I absolutely love it. And I like that sort of like positive perspective. I think it's something that I've always felt really strongly about, that, we've got to sort of have like the cooperation, not just competition, that, if you want to have a vibrant ecosystem where you've got employees to build from, we got to take a step back and say it's not manufacturers against manufacturers. It's like building a manufacturing workforce against other alternatives that people have to do in their lives. So I think that's a really, really, really good point. Well, I'm going to ask you 3 final questions to wrap this thing up. So the first one is, do you have a favorite business book that you would share with others?
Well, I've read a few, but one book that I'm reading right now, it's called Resisting Happiness. And it's got an interesting perspective in that it encourages people to be their authentic selves while they are going out into the world and sharing their gifts. And I just wanted to say that that's a really interesting book that I'm reading right now.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question about that. Why is it, I mean, I'm sure early on they explain why they call it resisting happiness. I'm trying to connect resisting happiness to that being your true self.
So the theme is that sometimes in certain environments, people will work really hard to just try to fit in and be what they think their employee or employer wants them to be, and maybe not being their authentic selves because they want to be accepted and they think that that's what they need to be a success. And that can get old and that can get difficult. And just be you and be your authentic self, and the right opportunities and people will come into your life and you'll be happier.
I 1000% actually agree with that. And I would take that a step further. I think, we always used to joke about when you go on dates with people, would you go with yourself or would you send your representative? Which is you're the person that you think that you want.
Exactly.
And if you send your representative, at some point, you're either going to have to keep that going forever, which gets exhausting.
It is, and it's not fulfilling.
No, and then you start to fear, if I start dropping my guard, are they going to actually like the person that I am on the, and it's just a terrible way to live.
Yourself from the beginning.
Way easier, right?
Easier.
Because just
Way
take
happier.
that. Yeah, you're going to find the people that you want to be with, and then you'll be really good. And it's a funny thing that I think people, you hear that thing that said find something. This is career advice that was very popular when I was much younger, which was find something you're passionate about and go do that for work. And I think that you got to be a little careful with some of that, right? Because some things that you're passionate about probably you can't do for work.
Yeah, you got to pay the bills.
Yeah,
too,
exactly.
Right?
But I do think what's really right about that is don't chase the money for something that you don't love doing, because that leads to a road of total unhappiness.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't resist the happiness.
Don't resist the happiness.
Be happy.
I like that. Who wrote the book? Do you know?
Matthew Kelly. is the
Matthew
author.
Kelly. Well, you know what? I actually just started a book someone gave me yesterday, but I will put this in the hopper. Cool. So it's 2 more. What's something that you learned early in your life or early in your career, Monique, that you think has really helped propel you to all the success you have? What's an early nugget that you latched onto that really helped you?
Well, expanding on the theme of the book, just doing and pursuing, what I wanted to pursue, even though there was a lot of times where you heard no, and is that really, girls don't do that, is that really what you want to do? It's going to be hard. You have to, I was stubborn, and I just no, that's what I want, and that's what I'm going to pursue, and I did it anyway. Even things engineers with MBAs, that's not a good thing. In the 90s, there was too many of them. They were talking people out of it. Now it's oh wow, you've got both. That's great, And I'm glad all the times that I chose me and I chose to pursue, what I thought was the right way to go for me, And I think that's that's so important that you continue to do that and just be your true self.
I love what gave you that confidence to do that?
I do not know. I do not know. My parents are she just does her own thing, right? And they just loved watching it, and they knew that they just couldn't talk me out of things. I think it's a little bit personality, but
a little bit more nature than nurture.
Yeah, but my parents did always tell me you can do anything you want. You can do anything. You can be anything you want to be, and I believed it.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure a couple of days they wish they had given you a little bit. Do what we say, not what. Yeah,
I know.
Something you did connect that lovely with the book, and I think that's just so absolutely true. That so often we end up listening to other people, and they have no idea what we're really feeling inside. And if you follow your own heart to where you want to go, even if it's the wrong turn, if it was your own decision, you can always go back and change it later. But you start listening to other people, you're going to find yourself 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line.
That's right.
In a place you never wanted to be.
Yep.
And then it's hard to get out of there.
Yeah, and you hear so many people in music or athletes, or movie stars that they say, I was told no 100 times, and I kept going, I kept trying, and then eventually they made it, right? And I think that's so important. It's not always easy. It's not always easy.
Good things are never usually
No,
are.
but if you want it, keep pushing and you're going to get it. You're gonna
Amen
get
to
there.
that.
Yeah.
So what's something that you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you could go back and tell young Monique, and if she'd listened to you, you think it'd make a huge impact?
Well, one thing that I've learned, again, at this point that I'm at in my career where I really do get a lot of joy out of helping people along with their career, I just remember the mentors that I had early on where I always felt I was, bothering them and taking up, their valuable time and, do you have a minute? And I had no idea how enjoyable it can be to give to people like that, right? And to help people. I always thought I was just being an inconvenience. And so I wish I had known how much of a gift I was giving those people the opportunity to help and bring somebody up and mentor them. I really thought I was just being annoying and bothering them, and now I realize how enjoyable it is, to give back. And I'll tell, I would like to tell that to everybody who's, asking for help, just do it because you're giving the gift to the person that's going to help you.
I'm going to leave it right there because I couldn't have said it any better. Monique, thank you so much for coming out. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by Compass MSP.